Emily Parker had already stayed later than she planned. The office nearly empty. The city outside the windows glowing with quiet impatience. And she felt that familiar mix of pride and loneliness that came from being the last one still working, unaware that this night would press itself into her memory forever. Her boss, Richard Collins, stepped out of his office with his coat on, apologizing quickly and explaining he had to leave for a family dinner. And before Emily could politely decline or gather her thoughts, his son Daniel appeared near the door holding car keys, offering to drive her home since her car was in the shop and the buses ran slow at night. Daniel was young but not careless. Calm in a way that felt steady rather than immature. And Emily noticed this more clearly now that they stood alone in the quiet office, the hum of lights filling the space between them. She agreed, telling herself it was just a ride, nothing more. Yet something about the way the night felt unusually still made her uneasy in a way she could not explain. The drive began without music, the city streets sliding past them in soft streaks of light. And Emily kept her eyes forward while Daniel focused on the road, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. She had known Daniel for over a year, seen him in meetings, overheard him joking with coworkers, noticed how he listened more than he spoke. But she had never truly looked at him until that moment. When silence stretched long enough to feel intentional, Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm but careful, saying he had always admired how Emily carried herself, how she worked hard without needing praise, and how she treated people with patience, even on the worst days. Emily felt her chest tighten, unsure where this was going, but she stayed quiet, sensing that interrupting him would break something fragile. He admitted he had wanted to say these things many times, but never found the right moment. Explaining that tonight felt different, like honesty would weigh less in the dark. Emily's mind raced as she listened, her thoughts jumping to boundaries, to her job, to the difference in their lives. Yet she could not ignore the sincerity in his words, the absence of drama or expectation. The car slowed at a red light, and Daniel confessed that he often felt lost, unsure of who he was supposed to become, and that Emily had unknowingly made him feel grounded just by being herself. That confession struck her harder than she expected, stirring memories of her own uncertain years, of rebuilding herself after a quiet heartbreak she rarely spoke about. She wanted to respond, to explain, to protect both of them. But the words stayed trapped behind her ribs as the car moved again. The streetlights reflected in the windshield like passing moments she wished she could pause. And for the first time in a long while, Emily felt truly seen. Not as an employee or a dependable adult, but as a woman with a history and a heart. When Daniel finally said he did not expect anything from her and only needed her to know the truth, the weight of his honesty settled deep inside her, heavy and unavoidable. They reached her apartment building sooner than she wanted, the car stopping too cleanly, too final, and neither of them moved right away. The engine humming softly as if waiting for permission to shut down. Emily realized then that some moments arrive without warning and leave behind questions that have no easy answers. And as she reached for the door handle, she understood that this ride home was never just a favor, but the beginning of something complicated, emotional, and impossible to forget. The next morning, Emily walked into the office carrying the weight of the night before, trying to move like everything was normal, while her thoughts kept replaying the quiet drive and Daniel's careful words. And even though the building looked the same, something inside her felt permanently shifted. She avoided looking toward the front desk where Daniel sometimes helped, focusing instead on her emails, her notes, the small routines that usually kept her steady. But concentration slipped through her hands no matter how hard she tried to hold on. By late afternoon, the office buzz had faded, and Emily noticed Daniel standing near the coffee machine, hesitant, as if unsure whether to speak or disappear. And when their eyes met, he gave a polite smile that carried more meaning than it should have. He approached slowly, keeping his voice low, asking if she had a moment. And before she could talk herself out of it, she followed him to the quiet break room where the walls seemed to close in with every step. Daniel apologized first, saying he worried he had made her uncomfortable. And Emily surprised herself by answering honestly, telling him she wasn't upset, just overwhelmed by the timing of everything. He nodded, relief and tension mixing on his face, and admitted he had barely slept, replaying his confession again and again, wondering if he had crossed a line that could not be undone. Emily reminded him gently that life was rarely simple and that emotions did not always follow logic. Yet she stressed that their situation mattered, their roles at work mattered, and choices carried consequences even when intentions were good. Daniel listened closely, his posture respectful, his words measured, explaining that he understood the risks and never meant to place anything heavy on her shoulders, only to be honest before silence turned into regret. As they talked, Emily noticed how different this felt from past conversations in her life. How there was no pressure, no demand, only shared vulnerability that made the moment feel both dangerous and deeply human. She spoke about her past without details about learning to protect her peace, about promises she had made to herself after losing something she once believed would last forever. And Daniel absorbed every word like it mattered, like she mattered. The break room door opened suddenly when a coworker passed by, and the interruption snapped them back into reality, reminding Emily how thin the line was between private truth and public misunderstanding. They stepped apart instinctively, returning to professional distance. But the air between them had changed, charged with things unsaid. The rest of the day moved quickly, meetings blurring together, emails sent without memory of typing them. And by the time evening arrived, Emily felt drained yet alert, like someone standing on the edge of a decision they were not ready to make. As she packed her bag, Daniel appeared again, careful not to linger too close, telling her he respected whatever space she needed and that nothing had to be decided now or ever. His restraint unsettled her more than boldness would have, because it forced her to confront her own feelings rather than react to his. Walking out of the building alone that night, Emily realized part 2 of their story was not about confession anymore, but about restraint, about two people choosing awareness over impulse. And as the cool air hit her face, she knew the hardest part was still ahead. Because once honesty enters a life, it cannot be undone, only managed. And she had no idea where that truth would lead them next. Days passed, but the tension between Emily and Daniel did not fade. It settled quietly into every hallway glance and every unfinished sentence, making the office feel smaller and more watchful than before. And Emily found herself counting hours instead of tasks, waiting for the workday to end so she could breathe again. She tried to remind herself that this was only a moment, that feelings rise and fall like tides. Yet each time Daniel's voice reached her from across the room, calm and steady, her resolve weakened just enough to scare her. One evening, after most employees had left, Daniel asked if they could talk. His tone serious but gentle, and Emily agreed, knowing avoidance would only stretch the discomfort further. They stood near the window overlooking the street, city lights flickering below like choices passing too quickly to grab, and Daniel spoke first, saying he had been offered a job in another state through a mentor and had been struggling with the decision, because leaving felt like running away from something unfinished. Emily felt a sharp pull in her chest, understanding immediately what he meant. And she asked what he truly wanted, not where fear or loyalty was pushing him. Daniel admitted he wanted clarity more than comfort, honesty more than hope. And he needed to know whether what he felt was real or just a passing season of admiration. Emily closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself, then told him the truth she had been holding back. That she felt something too, something unexpected and strong. But that awareness did not give permission to act without thought. She explained how easily emotions could blur lines, how careers, reputations, and trust could suffer even when hearts meant well, and how she had learned the hard way that short happiness could lead to long regret. Daniel listened without argument, his expression open but wounded, and said that knowing she felt something did not make things easier, only more honest. He confessed that he had imagined what life might look like if timing had been kinder, paths had crossed differently, but he understood that imagining and living were not the same. Emily stepped closer, not touching him, but close enough for her voice to soften. telling him that caring sometimes meant stepping back, not forward, and that choosing distance could be an act of respect rather than rejection. The words cost her more than she expected, leaving her voice tight and her hands trembling at her sides. But she stayed steady, knowing this moment would define what came next. Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it, and said he would take the job offer. Not as an escape, but as a step toward becoming the person he wanted to be. And Emily felt both relief and grief wash over her at once. The conversation ended without drama, without promises or dramatic farewells. Just two people standing in shared understanding, aware that something meaningful was being placed carefully out of reach. The following weeks passed quickly, preparations replacing tension, and Daniel focused on his transition while Emily returned to her responsibilities, each of them moving with a quiet awareness of what was ending before it could begin. On his last day, Daniel stopped by her desk, thanking her for treating his feelings with care and honesty. And Emily wished him well, her smile genuine even as her chest ached. As she watched him walk away for the final time, Emily realized that heartbreak does not always arrive with loss, but sometimes with choice. And part 3 of their story closed not with passion or regret, but with courage, the kind that hurts because it matters, leaving behind a silence filled with respect and unanswered possibilities that would linger long after he was gone. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm for Emily, one that looked calm on the surface but carried quiet echoes of what had almost been. And though the office returned to its usual pace, she felt the absence of Daniel in small, unexpected moments, like an empty chair during meetings or a familiar voice missing from the background. She threw herself into work, not to forget, but to move forward, learning that healing did not mean erasing memory, but placing it gently where it could no longer hurt her daily life. One evening, as she prepared to leave after another long day, she found a simple envelope resting on her desk. No return address, only her name written carefully. And her heart tightened before she even opened it. Inside was a short letter from Daniel, written from his new city, explaining that the job had challenged him in ways he never expected, that he was learning who he was when comfort was stripped away, and that leaving had been painful but necessary. He wrote about gratitude, about growth, about how some people enter our lives not to stay, but to change us. And he thanked her for being honest when it mattered most. Emily read the letter twice, then folded it slowly, realizing that closure does not always come through conversation, but sometimes through understanding that arrives later, quietly and without demand. In the weeks that followed, she noticed a shift within herself, a steadiness she had not felt in years, and she began saying yes to things she once avoided. Dinners with friends, short trips, moments of laughter that felt earned rather than forced. One afternoon, Richard Collins stopped by her office to tell her how proud he was of Daniel for taking a brave step forward. And Emily smiled sincerely, knowing that respect had been preserved, that nothing had been damaged by the truth they chose to handle carefully. Time continued its steady march, and while memories still surfaced, they no longer carried sharp edges, only warmth mixed with acceptance. One quiet night, as Emily walked home under soft streetlights, she reflected on how close she had come to letting emotion guide her without thought, and how choosing restraint had taught her more about love than any romance she had known before. She understood now that love was not only about connection, but also about responsibility, about knowing when to hold on and when to let go with grace. Weeks later, she received a brief message from Daniel, sharing that he had been promoted, that he felt proud for the first time in a long while, and that he hoped she was well, and Emily replied with genuine encouragement, noticing how easy it felt to wish him happiness without longing for more. The final piece of their story did not end with reunion or regret, but with mutual respect, growth, and a quiet understanding that some chapters close so others can begin properly. Standing at her window one evening, watching the city move beneath her, Emily felt whole. Not because she had found new love, but because she had honored her values and trusted her strength. She realized that what shattered her that night in the car was not heartbreak, but clarity, the kind that forces you to choose who you want to be. And as she turned away from the window, ready for whatever came next, she carried the lesson with her, knowing that the most powerful stories are not always the loudest ones, but the ones that shape us long after they end.